It's week 2 of Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. Today we get a new Dimir god that's a casual 2-mana 8/8, a weird treasure-producing vehicle, and a removal spell that is probably going to shake up Pioneer and maybe even Modern. Let's break them down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Live, and it's time for another daily dose of Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. So today we kick off week 2 of spoiler season, and we got some pretty spicy stuff to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new magic cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should mosey on over to mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So first up today, we got a random Dimir god. So apparently in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, we got this cycle of monocolor gods that flip into lands when they die. And then we have one random Dimir spirit god in the Ancient One. So the Ancient One, super interesting card. So 2 mana 8/8, absurd stats, a legendary spirit god. It has Descend 8 and it can't attack or block unless you have 8 permanent cards in your graveyard. And then you can pay for draw a card, discard a card, and then when you do, you can mill target player equal to the discarded card's mana value. So the Ancient One, obviously, at first glance, is an absurd card. Like 2 mana 8/8 is ridiculous stats. The problem is, this isn't actually going to be a creature early in the game. It's only costs 2 to cast, but it's not going to be functioning, attacking and blocking and doing any creature-y stuff until you not only get 8 cards in your graveyard, but 8 permanent cards in your graveyard, which actually makes me wonder just how strong this card is going to be. There is an absurd amount of competition for this slot, because right now in Standard, we have Urborg Lurgoyf, Cruel Somnophage, and Souls of the Lost. These are all 2-drops that fill your graveyard and get massive based on the number of cards in your graveyard. The Ancient One is like another on this list, and I don't know what to do with these cards. You just jam them all together? Is there a deck where you're just playing like 16 Urborg Lurgoyfs or 16 the Ancient Ones, and you just play all these and try to like turbo fill your graveyard and have all these like 2 mana 8/8s, 2 mana 10/10s, like all these just massive creatures? Maybe there is, and I'm not sure where the Ancient One ranks in the hierarchy of these cards. So Urborg Lurgoyf, Cruel Somnophage each have the upside of being able to fill your graveyard. I guess the Ancient One does too. If you think about it, its last ability of drawing and discarding and then milling, that is a way to fill the graveyard. I think it's a little less efficient, obviously, than Lurgoyf or Cruel Somnophage. And then we have Souls of the Lost, which also can fill the graveyard. Maybe it's an upside, maybe it's a downside with its additional cost to cast. You got to discard or sack a permanent, but it also gets massive based on the number of things in the graveyard. So I don't know what to make of this. I mean, I'm planning on trying the Urborg Lurgoyf deck again with the Ancient One. Just jam all these cards together, play every permanent that can fill the graveyard, and just hope for the best. The risk of this plan, obviously, is if your opponent wraths the graveyard and has some sort of a Soul Guide Lantern effect, things are going to go really bad really quickly, because suddenly your Ancient One can attack. Your Lurgoyfs and Somnophages and Souls of the Lost, they all get really small again. So it'll be interesting to see, like, is this enough to make the archetype work? Urborg Lurgoyfs aside, there are some other ways to potentially use this card. This becomes immediately, I think, the best fight rigging creature in Standard and even like in Pioneer. So the unique thing that the Ancient One offers is this is a creature that turns on fight rigging on turn 3. Turn 2, Ancient One. Turn 3, fight rigging. You immediately have a creature that's big enough to trigger fight rigging, and then hopefully put your, massive dinosaur or whatever you're using to finish the game into play. So I'm excited to try this. Fight rigging has got a lot of support in this set with these really high power, low cost creatures that have some drawback that keeps them from being truly busted, but they work really well with fight rigging. If you want to go really deep, maybe like Training Grounds to reduce the cost of his activated ability and try to discard like super high mana value cards like Shadow Immortality to mill your opponent out of the game in 1 or 2 turns. Probably not a super competitive plan, but it would be kind of fun. In older formats, 2 mana means it works with Lurrus. I guess this is mostly historic and specific, but we've seen some Lurrus like self-mill sacrifice style decks where you have like Archfiend's Vessel coming out of the graveyard. The Ancient One can join this package, works with Lurrus, coming back, filling your graveyard, doing shenanigans. I also see people always say, okay, what about Dredge? Are you going to play this in Dredge? And I think the answer is no. Like, historically, Dredge doesn't play creatures that are just big that don't have the Dredge mechanic. And I think if Dredge did want a card like this, it would probably be Souls of the Lost, which Souls of the Lost at least has the upside that you can just discard a Dredger on turn 2 to play it. So I think if Dredge did want a card like this, it's probably Souls of the Lost and not Ancient One. Once you get back to Commander, there's a few possibilities. So this is really good in self-mill style decks. If you're playing like Phoenix, that was the first thing I thought of. This is like ridiculous in Phoenix. It's a 8/8, even if it can't attack, it still taps to mill 8, so it's gonna fill your graveyard super quick or mill your opponents out super quick. Can work with Lazav, that's another popular self-mill commander. The other possibility is this might just be the new favorite self-mill commander. It is a pretty sweet card. You can probably turn it on very quickly if you build around it, and if you do turn it on, in 8/8's a really fast clock. It doesn't take that much equipment to turn this into a 2-shot commander damage kill. So the Ancient One, super unique card. I'm actually very curious what y'all think of this. Is this card busted because it's a 2-mana 8/8? Is it unplayable because of Descendate? Somewhere in between. Really curious what you think of the Ancient One. I think minimum, this is like a busted fight rigging card. Super excited to build that deck. I'm super excited to try some number of these in the 16 Orborg Lurgoyf deck. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but that seems like a ready-built home for it. And it also has some cool commander potential as well, but definitely let me know what you think in the comments. Next up, we got a super strange red vehicle in Magmatic Galleon. So this is a 5-mana 5/5 with Crew 2. It's a vehicle. It says when it enters a battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target creature an opponent controls. And whenever one or more creatures your opponent controls are dealt excess combat damage, create a treasure token. So the unique thing about Magmatic Galleon is this is a vehicle that actually plays more like a weird artifact or enchantment. Like, yes, there will be times when you fire it up and beat down, but you could play this just for its ETB and static ability. Like, ETB kills something, and then when excess damage is dealt, you get a treasure token. That's enough by it itself. So maybe this is one of the ways that Wizards is trying to make vehicles more playable, is making vehicles. Remember when they added static abilities to Planeswalkers? I'm kind of seeing this as the same thing. Like, this is a vehicle that can sometimes be a creature, but if you never ever crew this, it could still have a home in your deck. So this reminds me a little bit of Surge Hacker Mech as a vehicle that offers removal, probably a powered up vehicle. The problem with Surge Hacker Mech is you really need to be a dedicated vehicle deck because its damage triggers based on the number of vehicles you control. Magmatic Galleon doesn't need any additional support. It's just 5 damage no matter what, which kind of makes it like a Mightstone and Weakstone vehicle. Mightstone and Weakstone just coming down to give something -5, -5. Not horrible for 5 mana. So it's like an okay removal option. And then it might give you a discount on its cost right away, like its second ability, which triggers based on excess damage. If you play this and snipe something that's 4 toughness, let's say, that would deal excess damage, so then you'd get a treasure token, which is a nice little bonus. And you can also use it with other removal spells. You unleash the Inferno something, you get the excess damage, you get the treasure token, plus you get the unleash the Inferno ability. So it's kind of a nice option if you're throwing huge amounts of damage at things, although it is worth mentioning that it only works specifically once, no matter how many creatures are dealt damage, which is relevant with some red sweepers. So as far as where this could fit, we have like Ixalan in Standard, the red god that does kind of care about damage. It's a good way to like power up your smaller burn spells. So maybe that's a way you can like play with fire but actually get excess damage out of it for your Magmatic Galleon. So that's a possibility. Maybe this could show up in Greasefang. Now Greasefang in Standard has 2 powerful removal vehicles. So maybe you can build like Greasefang Control. The problem with Greasefang in Standard is just like Greasefang in Pioneer, you still have the problem of getting blown out by Graveyard Hate, but you don't have a Parhelion, this vehicle that just like essentially wins you the game, that makes it worth the risk of getting blown out by Graveyard Hate. But maybe there's some sort of like mid-rangey Greasefang deck where, yeah, you don't have a Parhelion to win the game right away, but maybe instead you're just like reanimate Magmatic Galleons, shoot one of your things, make a treasure, next turn reanimate Surge Hacker Mech, shoot down one of your things, and you just kind of grind your opponent out that way. So we'll have to see. The other problem with this plan is like there's so many graveyard things in Standard now that I expect Graveyard Hate's going to be on the rise, but this could be good for Standard Greasefang. As I mentioned before, there's some weird twists here for this card in Commander in specific. So for one thing, no matter how many creatures are dealt excess damage at the same time, you make 1 treasure. So let's say you Blasphemous Act and there's like 20 creatures on the board. You're not going to get 20 treasures. You're going to get a single treasure because 1 or more creatures dealt excess damage. On the other hand, there is a weird twist to this wording. It doesn't care who is dealing the damage? If one or more of your opponent's creatures take excess damage, non-combat damage, you get the treasure token. So what this means is, if your opponent Blasphemous Axe, you would still get the treasure token, which is kind of a cool twist. Like, I could imagine maybe playing this in Commander and just wanting it to sit out on the board and hopefully generate treasures, especially if I was a deck that cared about artifacts or vehicles or whatever. So kind of an interesting way to format this card. As far as specific homes in Commander, we have a couple of excess damage commanders: Aegir the Freezing Flame, Toralf God of Fury. So if the whole gimmick of your deck is trying to deal excess damage, this is another reward for excess damage, which is nice because excess damage is a relatively new mechanic in Magic, so there's not a lot of cards that care about it, so just having anything that actually cares about it is a nice upgrade to excess damage decks. Also works pretty well with like Mishra, copying artifacts. Imodain doesn't actually care about excess damage, but it does end up dealing a lot of excess damage with how it works with big burn spells, so it could be a role player there as well. As far as older constructed formats, I think it's just bad Sky Sovereign. I mean, I don't think this is replacing Sky Sovereign in like Pioneer Greasefang or something. One thing about vehicles, which I think mostly remains true, is almost every constructed playable vehicle has flying. We have very little track record of non-flying vehicles being playable in constructed at all, and especially outside of standard and constructed. So I think the fact that Sky Sovereign, even though it deals less damage up front, the fact that it's a 6/5 flyer rather than a 5/5 ground creature, I can't imagine Greasefang actually replacing their Sky Sovereigns with Magmatic Galleon. So I think mostly a standard only card, definitely a commander card, but a super cool design, and I like the direction Wizards going with this card of making a vehicle that can generate value even if you never crew it with static abilities and ETB triggers. We also got a new black 4-drop Spirit Horror in Starved Revenant. So 4 mana 4/4, Spirit Horror. When it enters the battlefield, you surveil 2. Then for each card surveilled to the top of your library this way, you draw a card and lose 3 life. And then it has Descend 8, and it says whenever you draw a card, if you have 8 or more permanents in your graveyard, target player loses a life and you gain a life. So this card is kind of interesting. When I first saw it, I was like, this is kind of like Black Mulldrifter if you think about it. 4 mana 4/4 ETB draw 2 cards. That's kind of the base level of this card. If you surveil both of the cards to the top, you're going to draw both of them. Downside is you are going to lose 6 life if you draw both cards, so there is a high life cost to this. So that's kind of the biggest twist, I guess, compared to Mulldrifter. On the other hand, you don't have to surveil both to the top. I think a lot of times you'll probably see surveil 1 card to the graveyard to like trigger Descent, and then keep the other on top to draw a card and lose 3 life. But it is a nice card advantage option. I think it goes up in value more in Commander, where you have 40 life to work with rather than 20. Like, taking 6 in Standard, that's actually a lot of your life total, especially against an aggro deck. Taking 6 in Commander isn't really anything, and doubly so in a black deck that can just, like, Exsanguinate or Grey Merchant or gain back all that life easily. The Descend mode essentially turns Starved Revenant into Quasi Augur of Agony. So whenever you draw a card, you drain an opponent for 1, which kind of makes it like a weird mini Sheoldred almost. Speaking of Sheoldred, anytime we see a new black 4-drop, you gotta kind of evaluate it in the context of Sheoldred in Standard, and I would say Starved Revenant, not Sheoldred, even though I really do like its ETB trigger. Its ETB trigger is a nice upside. That's Sheoldred, something that Sheoldred doesn't have. So I do like its ETB trigger. I don't think this is replacing Sheoldred though, but it may be good enough, especially in a Descend style deck where you really care about filling your graveyard, to see play alongside Sheoldred. Plus, Sheoldred does work really well with this because Sheoldred gains you 2 life whenever you draw a card. So all that stuff we were saying about, oh, the card draw is nice, but you lose so much life, that kind of goes out the window if you also have Sheoldred, because Sheoldred's going to gain you back most of the life you lose with Starved Revenant's draw a card ability. It also seems like a pretty nice option for Descend decks. If you're trying to like turn on the Myco Tyrant or flip Brass's Tunnel Grinder or grow your Statellite Stalker, Starved Revenant is probably a good enough option for that in Standard. That brings you back to the scenario we were talking about before, where you probably surveil 1 card to the top and 1 into the graveyard. So the one in the graveyard is going to trigger all your Descend stuff. The one on the top gives you some card advantage. You're only losing 3 life, and then eventually you're going to get enough cards in the graveyard that you start, boosting your life total with its Descend ability as you draw cards. As far as Commander is concerned, probably best as like backup Nekuzar target. Really though, as I said, like Black Mulldrifter is kind of appealing. Losing 6 life in a black deck in Commander doesn't scare me. So this could be in the conversation for like Yarok style decks, Panharmonicon style decks, Horror style decks, because it is just a nice boost of card advantage, and then eventually you're going to descend and start draining and gaining that life back. Although it does seem built to be a backup in Nekuzar decks, where you get another like way to punish your opponent as you wheel through your deck. But I could see playing this in like Captain Agathon because of the horror thing, Madrotha for the graveyard synergy, Sidisi, the Mimeoplasm, along with like Panharmonicon ETB style decks. So start Revenant. I kind of like this card. Like, it's a nice amount of value with its ETB. If you ever turn on the Descend ability, you get some extra value out of it there, and a 4-mana 4/4 isn't horrible stats, so all around a nice little value card. We also got, oh my god, Molten Collapse, a really super duper good new removal spell. So, red and a black sorcery. Choose one. If you descended this turn, you can choose both. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value of 1 or less. So this is essentially an upgraded Dreadbore. Like, it's base mode. No descend, no anything. It is literally Dreadbore. Destroy target creature or planeswalker for 1 Rakdos mana, 1 of each Rakdos mana. So that's the base. Like, worst case scenario, this is just Dreadbore. And then you get this upside with Descend, where sometimes you're going to get like a mini Witherbloom command mode. And that last mode, destroy target non-creature, non-land, permanent mana value 1 or less. A lot of times that's not going to do anything, but there will be situations where that's super relevant. And one of the things I like about this card is Dreadbore is one of the Pioneer staples that's missing from Magic Arena. It's always made me a little bit salty. I don't know why they wouldn't put it on there. It's such like a simple, easy card to just add to Arena, but that's one of those cards that keeps Explorer from being real Pioneer. This doesn't actually add Dreadbore to Arena, but it does eliminate the need for Dreadbore on Arena, because I think that if you're playing Dreadbore in your Pioneer deck, you just play this now instead. It does everything Dreadbore does, but you get an additional upside. So this is quite literally just a strictly better version of Dreadbore. And like I said, Dreadbore saw heavy play in Standard, it sees heavy play in Pioneer, and it sees fringe Modern play as well. So this isn't like power creeping Giant Spider or something that no one cares about, some random draft common. This is power creeping a very playable card that does see heavy play. So I think this is a new staple removal spell. As far as the second mode, so obviously the first mode, we know what Destroy a Creature or Planeswalker does. That's why people play Dreadbore. How relevant is the second mode? So in Standard, it's like a little relevant. There will be times when this lets you snipe a Soul Guide Lantern or a Dusk Rose Reliquary. There's some, artifact mana value 1 sitting on the battlefield. Not going to come up super often in Standard, but on occasion it will be relevant. Once you get back to older formats though, it becomes much more relevant. If you look at like Pioneer and Historic, there's a lot of Pithing Needles, there's a lot of Portable Holes, Utopia Sprawl, new staple in Historic. Once you get back to Modern, Chalice the Void Engineered Explosives are literally the 2 most played non-creature spells in the entire format. Alpine Moon to shut down Tron lands and shut down Amulet Titan shenanigans, Stone of Eric, other graveyard hate. So yes, there's still going to be a lot of games where this doesn't do anything, but when you see the huge list of things this does hit, plus you add in like archetype specific stuff, Hardened Scales, the Ozolith, things like that that don't show up in most decks but are really important to specific playable archetypes, I think that you're actually going to get a decent amount of value out of that second mode. And in Modern, triggering the Descend is trivial because any fetch land will do it. So if you do want both modes on this, your deck should be able to do that really consistently. So Molten Collapse, to me this looks like a new staple removal spell. I mean, it straight up just power creeps Dreadbore, which is already a staple removal spell in Pioneer, doesn't even exist on Arena. So I expect we'll be seeing a ton of this in Standard, in Pioneer, on Arena formats like Explorer and Historic, and probably even a little bit back in Modern. In Modern, Dreadbore's a card that if you talk to Modern players, it's kind of right on the cusp. It's like the, oh, I'll try it in Rakdos Scam, or I'll try it in Jund, but it doesn't always actually make the cut. I think that extra mode, the fact that you crack a fetch and you get both of these modes, with that long list of cards that are non-creature non-lands with mana value 1 or less, might be enough to push this from not quite good enough to actually good enough to see play in Modern as well. In the world of low rarity cards, we actually have quite a few that are pretty strong and relevant today. First up, Dusk Rose Reliquary. So 1-mana artifact is an additional cost to cast this spell. Sack an artifact or creature. It has Ward 2, and when it ETBs, you exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So I actually think this card can be really, really good. There's a lot of portable holes that see play, especially back to Pioneer, even in Modern in some decks that care about artifacts. Dusk Rose Reliquary is kind of like a portable hole, except it can get rid of any artifact or creature. There's no mana value restriction on it. Of course, there's a downside. You gotta sack an artifact or creature. But remember, in some decks, that's an upside. You want things dying and going into the graveyard. So if you're a deck that can afford to sacrifice stuff, I think this is actually a really powerful removal spell, potentially even outside of Standard, and definitely in like the Vampire sack deck or Oni Called Anvil sack deck in Standard, where this seems like it should be a staple. We also got a new uncommon Merfolk Legend, a 2-mana 2/3, and this is our Explorer payoff. Whenever a creature you control explores a land, you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tab. So essentially, rather than exploring lands into your hand, you can explore them onto the battlefield, and then when a creature you control explores a non-land, put a +1/+1 counter on this along with the thing that got the +1/+1 counter. So this is our Wild Growth Walker. We haven't really seen a good payoff for exploring. Last time we had Explore and Ixalan in Standard, Wild Growth Walker was a legit staple, and I don't think that this is as good as Wild Growth Walker. It works kind of similarly. You don't get the life gain. It's not going to grow as quickly, but it is a really powerful ramp effect, and we do have a lot of Explore stuff in Standard. Senate Scout, Jade Light Splunker, Amelia. So if you add all these things together into a deck, I think there's a chance that maybe there's an Explore deck that can actually take advantage of this. A 2-mana 2/3, not a bad starting point. It is kind of annoying that it's legendary, so you can't stack them up, but still, this seems like a card that has constructed ramifications. We also got a new green 1-drop in Ixalli's Lorekeeper. So this is a 1-mana 1/1 human druid that taps at a mana of any color only for dinosaurs or activated abilities of dinosaur sources. So this card is huge for dinosaurs. Wizards doesn't print 1-mana mana dorks into Standard is a general rule, and I think having access to one of these, a Birds of Paradise or a Land of War Elves style effect, is a huge reason to play dinosaurs in Standard. This gives dinosaurs something no other deck has access to, that turn 1 acceleration. So if dinosaurs are a real deck, I think the fact that they get a Birds of Paradise and no one else does is going to be a big reason why. We also got Terrifying Vistage / Terrifying Skelesaur. So this one, the backside, I don't think is super relevant outside of maybe limited, but the front side, 2-mana artifact. When it ETBs, target opponent reveals their hand, you can choose an artifact or creature from it, the player discards it, and then you can craft with 2 creatures and 6 mana to get a 5/4 with Menace that can mill some cards. But I think this is worth mentioning just because we have seen 2-mana discard effects see play before. Agonizing Remorse, check for traps. This is worse is discard, because it only gets artifacts or creatures. You're not going to get rid of a counter spell, let's say, which is annoying. On the other hand, if you have artifact entering the battlefield synergies, if you have permanent synergies like Descend, if you just need something to sacrifice to your Oni Called Anvil, like I could imagine in an Anvil deck, play this, take your opponent's Sheoldred, sack this to your Anvil, you know, do your Anvil shenanigans. So in those contexts, this could actually be a relevant card for Constructed. We also got our Signpost uncommon for Golgari, an Akawalli the Seething Tower. So a 3-mana 3/3 legendary fungus. It has Descend 4, as long as there's 4 more permanents in your graveyard. It has +2/+2 in trample. So with Descend 4, it's a 3-mana 5/5 trampler, and then it has Descend 8 as well. If there's 8 or more permanents in your graveyard, it gets an additional +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. So if you get 8 permanents in your graveyard, this is a 3-mana 7/7 trample, can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. This card seems powerful, but it kind of has the same problem we were talking about before, is there's like a million of these 2-mana cards that grow based on things in your graveyard. So I'm actually wondering if this makes the cut. Like, if it wasn't for Cruel Somnophage and Urborgoyf and the Ancient One and Souls of the Lost and the Myco Tyrant, I would be like, wow, this seems like a constructed playable card. Like, a single Somnophage in an all-permanent deck is going to turn this into a 3-mana 5/5 trampler. That's actually kind of legit, but the question is, if you're playing the Cruel Somnophage deck, like, do you want to be playing this 3-drop, or would you rather be playing more Cardboard Lorewolves and Ancient Ones and Souls of the Lost. So I think this is a powerful card that has potential to see play. Maybe it's like a one-of because it's legendary or something, but there's just so much it's like absurd to me how many of these cards are that care about the graveyard and get huge based on things in the graveyard. So this is just another one to add to the list. And since it doesn't fill the graveyard itself, like most of these cards, Somnophage, Lorewolf, Soul of the Lost, even the Ancient One, maybe this is the one that doesn't end up making the cut. We also got a card that I am shocked to see in existence, Glimpse the Core. So Glimpse the Core, 2-mana green sorcery, search your library for a basic forest card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle, or return target cave card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this card is something that Wizards has not added to Standard in many years, like a decade now, which is 2-mana green ramp. It's very limited because it only gets a basic forest, but still, this is a rampant growth or a Farseek effect in Standard. If you go back through the last decade of Magic, the only cards that are kind of like this are Emergent Sequence, which doesn't really count because it's actually making a mana dork that dies to removal because it turns a land into a creature, in Thunderherd Migration, which does do it, but only specifically if you're Dino deck and can reveal a dinosaur in your hand. So this is the first time we've had a real unconditional 2-mana land ramp spell in Standard since, I want to say, like original Zendikar era. We're talking like 2011, 2012, a long time ago. So I'm very curious to see just how good this card's going to be. Obviously, we know that ramping from 2 to 4, very powerful. Like, that's Shieldred a turn earlier, Blossoming Tortoise a turn earlier. It seems very good in like mono green Nissa decks, which have kind of been around the fringes of Standard since Nissa like want to get it down early and it cares about forests. I'm going to be very interested to see just how good this card is. So yes, it has a restriction. It only gets specifically a basic forest, which means, and this is a good thing, your like 5-color Triome decks probably aren't going to be able to play this because you're not going to be able to run enough basic forests in your deck. On the other hand, 2-color decks like Golgari, mono green decks for sure, are going to get access to a really powerful ramp spell that was something I thought Wizards just wouldn't put into Standard anymore. That was my understanding, is we just don't print these anymore. Been very interesting to see over the last couple of sets. We got a real 2-mana Mana Rock in Standard, even though it was legendary, which is a drawback. And now we get a real 2-mana land ramp spell, even though it only gets forest, which is a drawback. So it seems like Wizards is experimenting with bringing some of these historically powerful effects back to Standard, trying to find the mix that'll make them work. If you think about something like Farseek or Rampant Growth that just gets any basic land or any land with a specific type, this is certainly worse than that. But if you think about the versions we've had since then that cost 3 mana, it's certainly better than that. So it feels like Wizards trying to make like a 2.5 mana Rampant Growth, if that makes sense. Something that's not as strong as the old versions, but not as bad as the more recent versions, which are mostly just unplayable. So I'm very excited to see what this card does. Also, if you're a cave deck, you get the additional upside caves going into the graveyard by sacrificing themselves. Plus, remember, we're a Descend format now where you're probably going to be self-milling in some decks. Being able to get back a cave is even more powerful in some ways, just because caves have strong activated abilities. So Glimpse the Core, not going to go in every deck because of the basic forest restriction, but if you can harness its power, this is an effect we haven't seen in Standard in a long time. In Box Topperville, just one today, the Richard Classic Coat of Arms. If you're playing a deck built around a bunch of creatures of the same type, pretty good finisher. Just don't run it out early because it is symmetrical and going to grow your opponent's stuff too. But in Commander, really good as a tribal payoff to just come down on the turn that you're planning on winning the game, pumping all your team massively, killing the table all in one shot. Of course, we also got a bunch of other lower rarity stuff you're going to see in Limited, maybe on the fringes of Constructed, but you can check that all out over at MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers for today. So let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, make sure to check out the video about the plays that actually forced Wizards to change the rules of the game. Or if you missed it, you can check out Saturday's daily spoiler video here.